This represents the global population in the mid-14th century, roughly 500 million people. Within a single generation, 200 million of those blocks drop out. That is nearly 40% of Europe's total population erased in less than a decade. Pandemics like the 6th century plague of Justinian had struck before, but they lacked the specific conditions required to reach this level of global destruction. To understand why the 1340s were different, we have to look at the fragility of the world the plague was about to enter. By the 1330s, Europe had reached a demographic ceiling. The population hit nearly 80 million, pushing the land to its absolute limit. Every available acre was under the plow, leaving zero margin for error in a society that relied entirely on manual harvest. When the weather turned cold and wet, the saturated fields failed. Widespread malnutrition followed, forcing thousands of starving rural families to abandon their ancestral lands in search of food. They moved toward the cities, which were already struggling with unregulated expansion. These urban centers became overcrowded mazes, where refuse filled every corner and sewage flowed through open gutters in the streets. Europe was biologically exhausted and economically stretched to the breaking point. It had become a tinderbox, and the spark was already moving across the steppe. The Eurasian steppe had long acted as a natural barrier, keeping localized diseases contained by sheer distance. However, the rise of the Mongol Empire unified these once isolated plains under the Pax Mongolica, removing those geographical obstacles. The booming Silk Road and the Mongol Yam messenger system created a high-speed transit network. Pathogens that used to die out in the desert were now carried by caravans directly toward the western ports. In 1346, this network reached the Crimean Peninsula. A Mongol army of the Golden Horde had besieged Kaffa, a vital Genoese trading hub protected by these massive stone walls. When the plague ravaged the Mongol camp, the Khan turned dying soldiers into weapons, catapulting their corpses over the fortifications and into the city. Terrified merchants fled Kaffa by sea, but they didn't leave alone. As their galleys sailed for the Mediterranean, they carried the infection into the most active shipping lanes in the world. The very trade routes built to grow human wealth had inadvertently been repurposed as a delivery system for its destruction. The primary transport for this disease was the black rat. It was an exceptionally resilient climber, capable of entering small openings and chewing through lead or unhardened concrete to reach grain stores. These rats were hosts for the oriental rat flea, an insect capable of surviving for a month without a blood meal. It could wait patiently on clothing, fur, or cargo until it sensed a new host. This microscopic view reveals the Yersinia pestis bacteria. While most bacteria simply feed on their host, this pathogen actively manipulates the biology of the insects that carry it. Once inside a flea, the bacteria multiply so aggressively they form a mechanical blockage in the insect's stomach, seen here as a dark, solid mass. Starving, the flea bites its host repeatedly, regurgitating the concentrated bacteria directly into the victim's bloodstream. It was a biological machine evolved to exploit the exact point where human urban life met the rodent world. In humans, the bacteria invaded the lymphatic system, causing the nodes in the groin and armpits to swell into agonizing purple-black boils. Within days, internal organs began to fail, often leading to a rapid, painful death. Medieval medicine had no defense. Doctors attempted to lance the boils and rub them with a mixture of herbs and human excrement, or prescribed the drinking of urine, treatments that often introduced secondary infections. The academic consensus at the time attributed the crisis to miasma, poisonous vapors in the air, or a cosmic alignment of the planets that supposedly occurred in March 1345. This lack of understanding led to extreme religious movements. The flagellants embarked on massive public pilgrimages, whipping themselves until they bled. By moving from town to town with open, infected wounds, they became mobile vectors for the disease. As the death toll rose, the social fabric tore. Families abandoned their own children, and terrified communities began seeking scapegoats, leading to the systematic torture and burning of Jewish populations across Europe. Without the framework of germ theory, Every desperate attempt to save society only accelerated its collapse. By the time the plague faded in 1353, it had left behind a morbidly altered worldview. Art and culture became obsessed with the danse macabre, the idea that death was the ultimate, indiscriminate equalizer. But the demographic collapse also triggered an economic pivot. With so many dead, the survivors found themselves in a world where labor was suddenly the most valuable commodity in existence. Peasants who were previously tied to the land realized they could now demand higher wages and better living conditions. For the first time, survivors had the leverage to move and seek better opportunities, effectively ending the old system of serfdom. When traditional prayer and Galenic medicine failed to stop the dying, the survivors began to look for more practical answers. The inability of the old institutions to explain the plague forced a slow turn toward direct observation and empirical evidence. Meanwhile, the sheer lack of available hands forced a new focus on mechanical innovations to do the work that people no longer could. The Black Death was humanity's most catastrophic failure, yet by violently breaking the Malthusian deadlock, it left the survivors with a surplus of resources and a desperate need for new ways of thinking. The paralysis of the medieval world was over, not because of a choice, but because the old system had finally run out of people to sustain it.